I thought what we could talk about tonight is the fear of awakening. It's sort of an odd topic, right? You wouldn't think that what we spend a considerable amount of time and life energy pursuing, that we would discover that there is fear that's causing us to back away from that at the same time. That's what often happens. It's not uncommon at all. And the tendency is the closer we get, the more this issue of fear of awakening can become very real. So I just wanted to talk about that tonight, to just explore the basis for that, why that arises, and how we can work with that. So fear. I mean, there's physical fear, right? If you're driving and someone's driving the other direction towards you and wanders out of their lane at a combined speed of 120 miles an hour, there's legitimate fear, and it's good because it gets our attention and we take action. So we're not talking about physical fear here that can serve a purpose. If it's based on what's actually happening. So what we're talking about here, though, is psychological fear. And the psychological fear is essentially, when you get right down to it, the fear of not existing, the fear of ceasing to exist. I know that may sound a little dramatic, but when we really look at what it is that we're defending, to sort of limit our sense of psychological fear, it comes down to someone perhaps saying something derogatory about us, or maybe there's a worry about losing our job, or we've made an poor investment and we've lost money, and that causes fear. Or our partner may leave us or talk about leaving us, and that might cause fear. So these are that fear that can be caused by these sort of impacts to our psychological being can feel as painful as physical harm. But they're not life-threatening, right? What they are threatening to is our sense of self, our sense of self-worth, sense of self-image, sense of just who we believe ourselves to be. And that is what comes under threat, the psychological threat. And we can feel vulnerable to that because we are. I mean, at any moment, we can be walking down the hall and, an acquaintance may say something that we find hurtful, and suddenly our day goes down the drain. Or we can do it to ourselves. We can be having a perfectly fine morning and then recall some particular painful event from our past, call it up to current memory, and feel the same kind of contraction and fear and hurt and that we may have felt when the event occurred maybe years ago. So this, but what we're talking about being under threat is really our identity, right? If our identity is housed in our beliefs about ourselves, our egoic structure, our self-assessment, our self-image that we're trying to present to other people, that's vulnerable, right? It's always vulnerable. Every day there's possibility that it will get impacted. And we might find ourselves reacting to that, maybe thrashing out at the other person, saying something mean in response, maybe sulking away, maybe, plotting some imagined revenge, um, or maybe just taking a psychological hit. So we can feel vulnerable. We know that's all possible. And it has to do with the fact that what is at risk is what we identify ourselves as being. Right? So when we first get into spirituality, this idea of fear isn't even anywhere in sight. I mean, when we first get into spirituality, it can be enjoyable, even thrilling, a new adventure. There can be camaraderie with other people, in the same tradition. Even the, more challenging work of meditation can still feel like, you're shouldering up, an ages old, perhaps tradition of meditation and effort and discipline. And even that can feel good. It can be a sense of curiosity, wonder, hope. All of those things can be at play. So it's almost like a, special introductory offer of spirituality. There's nothing not to like. Um, and it can feel just like mere curiosity, like, oh, I'll just try it out and see if there's anything in it for me. Um, so it can feel quite lighthearted that way. Um, but if we go into it more deeply, we can begin to get into territory that we may find is more challenging. Um, and this territory has to do with stripping away certain beliefs and ideas and opinions about ourselves and other people in the world um, that aren't quite true. They're not quite what we essentially are. And so the ones that get stripped away first, where we just cease to believe that they're true, um, are sort of the low-hanging fruit, right? The ones that we see through and we see, yeah, that's right. If I get um, and my kitchen remodel, that's nice, but it's not actually doesn't actually change who I am. It's pleasant, yeah, and be more convenient to cook, sure, but it doesn't get to the heart of me. It's about really who I am. So those are the easier ones to see. Um, so, but during this period, as we're beginning to see what we're not, which is really a useful um, benefit of meditation. We're always looking for a better version of ourselves, but what um, is really the process is a seeing what we're not essentially. So it's much more a process of subtraction than addition, like subtracting um, ideas that we thought we knew for sure, and then realize maybe we're not quite as certain of that as we thought we were. So it tends to be a stripping away. So one of the sort of characteristics of, let's call it phase of this middle phase of this spiritual process, let's say, um, can be we can feel like it's sort of tough going, like we're putting out a lot of effort for meditation and inquiry, and it doesn't feel like there's that much movement. Um, we find ourselves meditating but getting frustrated because our mind continues to wander. We can continue to experience busy mind. Um, we might begin to wonder why I can't get this and other people seem to. We can feel puzzled by what is this really about? I thought it was going to be more about peace and love and joy, and here it is, it feels more like just slogging through the mud sometimes. Um, and just wondering, where it's going, what this process is. So during this time, it can just, um, rather than sort of gradually increasing clarity, what we may find is period, and there may be that as well, sure, but I'm talking about there may also be these periods where it's not quite clear how this is all unfolding, and whether it's really going the way it should go, right? So, but at this point, there can be some discouragement, but there can also be this sense of not wanting to walk away either. It's almost like we've come too far, seen a little bit too much, to just give it up, all up, and walk away. Right? It can happen that way too. But as I see it, all life is a journey of investigation. So even if we think we're giving up this, spiritual search and, get a job at some corporate giant, it's still all part of the um, learning process, the investigation of what I want this life really to be about, to find out what that is. So there can be this sense of, um, uh, where we've come too far to turn back, and we can begin to feel like there's this deeper longing, like, I really do want to find out what this life is about. We may not even know where this longing is arising from, but it's compelling, and it sort of insists on continuing to look. Um, and so there's a sense of, um, having this longing, some deep longing, come too far to turn back, and we've already picked the low-hanging fruit. So now we're, looking at ideas and concepts and beliefs that are much closer to home, much more tightly held, as we're really quite sure that they're true, beliefs about ourself and other people in the world and how everything should work. So now we're on a collision course here. So we have this longing, um, knowing it's too late to turn back, and then there's this, in dealing with um, more uh, closely held um, beliefs and ideas that are being challenged. Okay, so this is the collision course, and yeah, how that plays out is will be different for everybody, but that's the movement in that direction. Um, Adyashanti once wrote a poem about this particular um, point in our journey, and he described it as, um, climbing up onto the poker table, lying down on your back, placing yourself as the bet, because that's all you have left. I really like that image. So here we are at this, beginning to get to this point of feeling like there's some resistance there. There's this longing, this movement in the direction of further, and then we can begin to feel this pushback. Like I'm not so sure this is a good idea, right? We begin to feel like it's not just a game anymore. This is real, right? This is, we're talking about me now. We're not talking about, an idea outside or philosophy or anything. We're talking about me, this body, this mind, is what's at stake, because we're talking about our identity. Okay? And as we move in this direction, we're being asked to um, see through the illusory nature of things that we hold dear. And so we're being asked to, have things stripped away with or without our consent sometimes, right? So there's this sense of being vulnerable, um, you know, having this process that we may feel has gotten a little bit out of hand. For a while it was fun and games, but now it's not. Now it's like more serious. Doesn't have to be that way, but a lot of times, we can begin to feel a sense of resistance as as we are getting closer. So fear can arise as we're getting closer to realizing what we truly are. And that fear is based on not being able to see beyond what we can see. So we're being asked nicely or otherwise to give up some of, eventually all of our identity. And there's no guarantee for what is on the other side of that. There's no promise, right? I mean, we've heard stories, um, but it's sort of like hearing stories about heaven, and yet you're the one that has to die, right? So, the stories are fine, but when it comes right down to it, um, we can feel that it's um, me. Um, and it can feel very visceral in a sense because it is how we've defined ourselves. We have defined ourselves as this body mind, and when it feels like that identity is at risk, it can feel, um, can feel very real, very real. You don't know that it doesn't necessarily, it can't necessarily just be dismissed as well. That's just psychological. It can feel real. So we can begin to feel some resistance. Um, so this hesitancy is really founded on resistance and doubt and certainty also. Certainty that I know how this should work. I know what I am. I know, what I believe. Doubts about, whether this is really a good idea or not. And resistance about, I'm not sure I want to give that up. So when we're talking about fear, it is really proportional to how tightly we're hanging on. If we've come this far in the process and have learned to trust that um, sort of stripping away of ideas and beliefs about ourselves and other people and the world, and we've gotten more comfortable with that, then often the fear doesn't arise, or not nearly to that same extent, might not arise at all. Um, but often, as we get closer, there's this other pushback that's based on our clinging to the identity that we're maybe not happy with, but at least we're familiar with it, right? So in Zen, they talk about the abyss or the void or jumping into the void, or um, in Zen, it seems like they like to characterize um, realization in the most unattractive possible terms. Um, and I think there's a reason for that, in that um, it's to not hold out hope that somehow this is a personal improvement, you know, because if you're describing what's down the road in the spiritual journey as the void, it's hard to conceptualize um, that in a positive sense. Right? It is eventually, it's freedom, but sort of prevents the spiritual seeker from sort of making a story about it. I'm going through this pain now, but it'll all be wonderful, and I'll be happy, and it'll all be worth it. Um, so it takes away that hope, right? It takes away that um, um, concept about something in the future, of course. Um, so they paint it in these negative terms. So there can be this, just this sensation of fear can arise, like I say, especially as we get closer to it, when we realize what's actually at stake, what's actually being asked of us, sometimes demanded, to let go of our beliefs and what we are. So the sensation of um, fear, one of the ways in dealing with this is um, not to use the word fear, right? There's no such thing as fear. If you look for it in the body, you can't find fear anywhere. I mean, what you can find is maybe, raging thoughts. You can find maybe the heart, speeding up, beating faster, maybe sweating in the back of the neck, maybe, contraction in the belly. Those things you can find. I mean, those are physical sensations. Fear it is a concept, right? Therefore, we're not going to find a concept in the body. So what we can do with these particular sensations, just like the raging thoughts in our mind, is we can just pick one at a time, like just, let's say, raging thoughts. Okay. Um, and we'd be okay with that. Doesn't mean we have to like it, right? But can we allow it to be? Just thought, right? What amplifies the thoughts is the belief that they're true. We just allow them to be, watch, notice, notice the patterns, notice the trickiness, notice what they're trying to convince you of. But let them be. If we withdraw our energy of belief from them, then they're just thoughts. And that, we haven't added our energy to them, and they will dissipate. Maybe not right away, but they will. So we just look at that one at a time, work with our thoughts for a bit, maybe work with a contraction in our belly. Are we okay with that? Are we okay with our belly being tight at the moment? So we just break it apart. So it's not this big global thing that we conceptualize as fear, but it's just these really physical sensations. The other thing that we can do is realize that this movement of fear isn't coming from outside of us, not some external entity, sort of showing up to scare us away. We can just see that's not true. It's all happening within our awareness. Our awareness is bigger, vastly bigger than any experience that arises within it. The other little technique that we could do is just put our hand on something solid. Maybe our knee, maybe the chair, maybe the floor. Even the Buddha used this technique. The night before he woke up, he was tormented. So the story goes about, from illusory visions, and that's what he did. He's just put his hand on the ground, something solid, to reconnect. And the earth has an immense, almost infinite ability to receive energy. I mean, that's what happens when lightning strikes. The earth receives all of that. It's one of the fundamentals of the electrical system in your house. Everything's grounded, connected to the earth. So it's just something that we can do as well. The other thing you can do is if it really feels all too much, you can just ask that you're not opposing it, but it's just a little too much at the moment. You're willing to face whatever needs to be faced. but I need to dial it down a little bit right now. And just ask. It's a form of prayer, right? So just ask that. We're not demanding and we're not running away from it, but we're just asking that you're willing to face it, but just I need it to be a little less at the moment. Okay, so there's one of the things that we can notice is these fears that can arise. There is, I would say, always a thought behind it, some thought that we believe. Um, and then the fear is we've communicated it to our body. The mind has a thought that this is something that we should be afraid of, concerned about. That thought gets communicated to the body, and it can have the same physical reaction as we do when we, see a head-on collision on the highway coming our way. Okay, so it informs the body. The body naturally reacts. We interpret it as fear. So one of the things that our mind can tell us is this is scary, right? Um, I think this doesn't feel good. Something must be wrong, right? That's our conclusion. Right? But what's happening is our mind desperately wants to remain in control. So it will tell us anything to stay in control. The content almost doesn't matter, the content of what it tells us, as long as it can achieve its goal of staying in control. I mean, it's been in control for a long time, and it can see the possibility of its demotion, from master to servant. And mind doesn't like that. You know, mind may be all for spiritual practice, likes that, gives it something to do, lifelong hobby. What it doesn't like is realization, because that's something beyond its control, beyond its ability to know. The mind deals in concepts, and what we're talking about here is beyond concepts. So the mind um, can help us along the way to a certain degree, and then eventually, we have to let it go. We can still use it when we need to, but it's no longer the one in charge. So the mind can feel that, and it will use whatever tricks it has, and it has a lot of them, um, to pull you back. And one of the things it can say is, this isn't right. There's something wrong. You should be feeling better, not um, fear is a sign of something wrong. Don't trust this. Run away. Okay, and so we might find ourselves, coming up to the so-called precipice, and then think, no, I'm not going there, and back up, right? Might happen a number of times. And then one time, for reasons that you might not be able to explain at all, you don't stop. You just move forward anyway, move forward through that fear. Um, And that movement comes from a place that's deeper than courage, deeper than sort of desperate determination, like, oh, I'm going to do it this time. It's not that, because that, you can feel the ego in that, right? This comes from a deeper, quieter place. I've got to know, you know, whatever the cost, I just have to know that, and more of that movement. Okay, the other thing that mind can commonly tell us is, um, uh, I'll lose control. Right? That ring a bell with anyone? The assumption is that I have control now, but if I woke up, then I'd be giving up my control. But the assumption is the illusion that we're giving up. The assumption is I am in control now. But we can just look at the evidence, right? We can see that we're not in control of our own thoughts. They seem to arise whether we want them to or not. They don't stop when we want them to. They insist on thinking about a problem when we don't want to think about it anymore. We make a New Year's resolution and we can't live up to it. You know, there's plenty of evidence that we're not actually in control, but we continue to believe that, you know, we're relatively in control. So that's the fear that we're going to give up something that we have now, and then you know, we turn over control to what, life as a whole. Somehow life as a whole is less, we think that it's less trustworthy than our own ability to control our desires and ambitions and fears and judgments and jealousies and etc. So we can see that what we're being asked to give up is not something that we possess. It's an illusion that we carry, that we are the one in control, and that causes fear. But the way around it isn't to just sort of make a quantum jump, like I'm just going to give up control. No, just see that it's not actually the case right now. Um, you know, because it's just an objection that the mind can bring. Um, you know, the mind can also say, well, you know, I won't know who I am anymore. This is true. This is a true statement, right? You won't. You won't. The, the fact of the matter is, though, you, you know, before awakening, you don't know who you are now. So you haven't really given up anything. Um, you know, what we are asked or demanded to give up is our idea of who we are. That's actually what we're giving up. We're giving up a conceptual idea of who we are to find out what we really are. So the trade-off is we give up everything that we thought we were to find out what we've always been. That's it. That's the whole thing. But it sounds scary, but how would that be? I mean, how would I know who I am, what I would do? You know, and it's the answer isn't known, right? It's sort of a leap into the unknown. We don't know what that would look like. You know, I'm you know, sort of personifying a caterpillar, you know, just as they're find themselves weaving themselves into the cocoon, you know, saying, wait a minute, how do I know this is such a good idea? You know, who would I be? You know, I want to hold on to what I am. You know, this caterpillar thing isn't so bad. It's all right. But here I find myself going through this transition. I have no idea what's on the other side. I'm not so sure this is a good idea. And yet there's something, some deeper urge that causes us to move in that direction anyway. So I've heard people also uh, give themselves excuses, um, you know, not to wake up. You know, it's the same thing that we're talking about here, sort of getting up to the edge, this fear sort of, we realize what's really at stake here is my identity. The way, what I take myself to be is at risk. And what it can feel like is that I will cease to exist. Right? So if that sounds overly dramatic, um, maybe you haven't gotten to that um, level of stripping away, because it can feel exactly like that. It can feel like, no, this is the entirety of what I am, is being stripped away. It's not actually stripped away. It's more seen as illusory, but that seeing is painful. It can be, and it all depends on how tightly we're holding on to, grasping, holding on for dear life, um, what we imagine ourselves to be. That that grasping is the resistance of ego. It's the last ditch effort by ego to hang on to its um, authority, its role that we've inadvertently given it. Um, and so that's what it can feel like. So I've actually had someone tell me, someone had been in spirituality for quite a few years, 15 years maybe, say, well, I don't want to get wake up yet because I have two children, and they're in their early 20s, but they're sort of struggling, and I want to be there for them. And if I wake up, who knows what I'll do. He said this all very seriously. Okay. But the underlying assumption of that is somehow I'll be of more service to my children if I remain unaware of who I am than I would be if I was aware of who I am, really. So when we look at it at that sense, it doesn't make any sense at all. But we can use, well, the mind can use whatever works, right? Um, I mean, we can also find ourselves asking our question, out of this fear, will I want to do anything? What will make me get out of bed in the morning? How do I know I'll even want to go to work? And the answer, of course, is you don't. You don't know any of those things because you've never lived life from that space before. And when uh, awakenings have happened, a lot of people go through a certain amount of turmoil in their life. It's not that everything is at risk. If you're in a loving relationship, respectful, fulfilling, that's that in all likelihood will remain. If a relationship is based on neediness, an obligation, those kind of things, and then it's at risk, right? Same with your career. If you're doing it, just out of um, something your parents wanted you to do, maybe at risk, right? If it's something you love, no. Okay. Um, but life has a way of taking care of you. You will, when you need to pay the rent, or you will get out of bed and you will work and you will make it happen. Um, but you might find yourself also um, deciding to take a sabbatical, maybe change careers, look at life, maybe not chase, wealth and fame. You may relook at priorities there. Um, so the really the, the thing to recognize here is that as we get closer to awakening, there can be this fear, this hesitation of holding back, and it can be confusing because we can feel ourselves like, I've been on this path for years, and then suddenly there's this pushback, and it really feels odd. I have this longing, and yet there's this hesitancy, this resistance. So it's important to know that these are coming, they can both be happening at the same time, but they're coming from different places, right? The hesitancy is coming from our mind, telling us stories, you know, creating a sense of fear, creating doubt, creating resistance, um, by questioning the wisdom of going further down this path. Right. So that's all. That hesitation is all coming from ego. From this wanting to maintain this familiar self, even though it may be, feel imprisoning, uncomfortable, but at least I know what it is, right? It's at least it's familiar. So I'm going to go with that. I'm going to go with familiarity over over risk, right? Over the unknown. So at the same time, there's this deeper longing that's coming from someplace um, far deeper than self-will. Um, Almost, sometimes it's called divine discontent. There's this, we're discontent with, um, with the current state of affairs, that there, there's a push to look deeper, a deeper knowing, to go further down the road. Um, so this movement isn't under the control of our self-will. We thought it was at first, but it turns out not to be true in the end. It comes from some place much deeper than that. You could really say that source is seeking itself through you. That's where we begin to sense that that longing is coming from source seeking itself through you. And so that movement has power. And so these two movements can feel opposed to each other, but one's coming from ego, one's coming from a much, much deeper place. So what do we do with that? We hopefully by then we've learned that being opposed to something, like in this case, the hesitancy or the fear, will only amplify that sensation. So we know that we can't oppose it. In other words, just try to make that fear go away. I'm going to be courageous. I'm going to, or, feel bad because I've hesitated in the face of this, what I sense to be an imminent transition. We can, get down on ourselves about that. Or we can just see the mechanism, allow ourselves to feel that hesitancy, allow ourselves to feel that fear, be willing to experience that, see the source of it, see the source of that fear, that hesitancy is rooted in this sense of separate self, this sense of ego, the sense of me as a separate body, mind. That's where it's housed. So we can just see that really clearly. That's our job. That's what we can do. We can't dismiss it. We can't jump over it, but we can see the mechanism of that at work, and allow that to be seen, to be recognized, without judgment, without running away from it, without amplifying it, without making a story about it. Just seeing that that's what's happening. And it's common and it's natural and it's totally understandable, right? I mean, um, what is at risk here is the idea that we have about our own identity. So we can say, well, fear's probably a rational response in that case, but it is part of being willing to see through it, being willing to be with the fear, go through the fear, not around it, and realize that it is that sense of Fear, the bodily sensations that we talked about, are just arisings within the awareness that we are. Powerful arisings, convincing arisings, right? Still arisings within the field of awareness that we are.